My husband said he needed freedom. So I packed his bags. 3 weeks later, he came back crying. I didn't scream. I didn't collapse. I didn't even feel surprised. What I felt was quiet. Before you decide what kind of woman that makes me, stay with me for a moment. Because this story isn't about revenge. And it's not about being strong in the way people expect. It's about what happens when you stop begging someone to choose you. I remember the exact second he said it. Not the day, the second. We were standing in our kitchen, the one with the uneven cabinet door that never quite closed unless you lifted it slightly. The overhead light was on even though it was still bright outside. He was leaning against the counter, arms crossed, eyes not quite meeting mine. I just feel trapped, he said. I need freedom. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't look angry. He looked relieved. And that's the part that landed first. Not the words, the relief. I nodded. That surprised him. I could see it flicker across his face, like a skip frame in a video. He probably expected tears, or panic, or questions, maybe all three. Instead, I said, okay. One word. Calm. Steady. Not because I was brave, but because something inside me had already gone still. I walked past him, opened the hallway closet, pulled out the suitcase we usually used for vacations, the black one with the broken zipper that always snagged if you weren't careful. I packed his clothes neatly, shirts folded, jeans stacked, socks paired. I even set his watch on top, the one I bought him for our second anniversary. He stood in the doorway watching me, confused now, a little alarmed. You don't want to talk about this? He asked. I shook my head. You already did. That was it. No speech. No ultimatum. No tears sliding down my face. I handed him the suitcase. He left. The door clicked shut behind him, soft as punctuation. And here's the part people don't expect. I didn't fall apart that night. I washed the dishes. I took a shower. I slept. Not well, but I slept. 3 weeks later, my phone rang at 2:17 a.m. I stared at the screen for a long time before answering. His name looked unfamiliar somehow, like it belonged to a past version of my life. When I picked up, I didn't say hello. He was crying. Full, broken sobs. The kind that steal your breath and make your words tangle. I messed up, he said. I didn't know what I had. Please, please let me come home. I listened. Quietly, patiently. Then I said one sentence. And that sentence is the reason I'm telling you this story. But before we get there, before the bags, before the call, before the moment everyone thinks is the climax, you need to understand what came before. What I believed, what I ignored, and why my calm wasn't weakness. It was the beginning of something else. Stay with me. Before that night in the kitchen, before the suitcase and the quiet click of the door, my life felt settled. Not exciting in a cinematic way. Not perfect, but solid. Predictable in the way that lets you breathe without thinking about it. We had been married just under 3 years. Together for 6. Long enough that routines had replaced performances. Long enough that love looked less like sparks and more like shared grocery lists and synced calendars. Mornings were my favorite. I'd wake up first, almost always. I liked the silence before the day started asking things of me. I'd make coffee, stand by the window in my socks, and watch the street come alive slowly, dog walkers, joggers, the same silver sedan that always left at 7:10. He'd come in rubbing his eyes, hair sticking up, and steal a sip from my mug even though he had his own. That used to annoy me. Then it became familiar, then comforting. That's how our relationship felt, familiar, comforting. We talked about the future in loose, easy ways. Not pressure-heavy plans, just someday conversations. A bigger place, maybe a dog, maybe kids, eventually. Nothing urgent, nothing forced. I believed we were growing together, side by side, same direction. If you had asked me then whether I trusted him, I wouldn't have hesitated. Trust wasn't something I thought about. It was just there, like the floor beneath my feet. Looking back, that's what scares me the most. Even our arguments felt safe. They were quiet, practical, about schedules or money or who forgot to replace the toilet paper roll again. We never yelled, never slammed doors. We prided ourselves on being mature. I thought that meant healthy. At night, we'd lie in bed scrolling on our phones, occasionally sharing something funny, our shoulders touching. Sometimes we talked. Sometimes we didn't. The silence didn't bother me. I took it as proof we were comfortable. I didn't notice when that silence started lasting longer. There were small changes. So small I didn't label them at the time. He started staying up later than me. Started taking calls outside. Started saying white stuff with a shrug when I asked follow-up questions. Nothing dramatic. Nothing you could point to and say, that's it. Just a slight shift in gravity. I remember one evening, we were sitting on the couch, a show playing that neither of us was really watching. I laughed at something on screen and turned to him automatically, the way you do when you want to share the reaction. He didn't look up. His phone buzzed. He smiled, a real smile, quick, unguarded. Then he glanced at me and the smile disappeared. I felt something then, just a flicker, a tightening in my chest that didn't have a name yet. I told myself I was imagining it. That's the thing about trust. It teaches you how to explain away your own instincts. You don't want to be suspicious. You don't want to be that person. So you edit yourself. I edited myself a lot. I told myself everyone needs space, that relationships evolve, that comfort doesn't always look romantic. I reminded myself that love isn't supposed to feel new forever. And for the most part, I was happy. Or at least I thought I was. But there were moments, brief, quiet moments, where I felt like I was standing next to someone instead of with them. Like we were parallel lines, close but not touching. I ignored that too. Because when someone hasn't given you a reason to doubt them, doubt feels like a betrayal of its own. Now let me ask you something before I go further. Have you ever had that gut feeling that something was off, but you ignored it because you didn't want to believe it? Tell me in the comments. I want to know I'm not alone in this. The night before everything changed, he kissed me on the forehead before bed. Same as always. Said, good night. Same as always. But his voice hesitated. Just slightly. Like a word he almost didn't say. I noticed it. I just didn't understand it yet. The first real crack didn't come with a confession or a confrontation. It came disguised as something ordinary. Forgettable, even. It was a Sunday afternoon. The kind that feels like it's already slipping away before you've decided what to do with it. He said he was going to run a few errands. Groceries. Hardware store. Normal things. He took his phone. That wasn't unusual. What was unusual was the way he checked his pocket twice before leaving. I noticed it because I didn't want to notice it. When the door closed behind him, the apartment felt bigger. Too quiet. I told myself I was being dramatic. I turned on music, started folding laundry, tried to stay busy in that intentional way people do when they're avoiding their own thoughts. An hour passed. Then two. I sent a text. Everything okay? No response. Another half hour. I checked his location without thinking. We shared it. Always had. Convenience, we said. Safety. The dot was frozen in a parking lot across town. Not near a grocery store. Not near a hardware store. Just there. I stayed at the screen longer than I should have. Long enough for my coffee to go cold in my hand. He eventually came home carrying one small bag. Too small for the list he'd mentioned. He was cheerful. Overly so. Talking fast. Asking me questions he didn't seem to care about the answers to. I listened more than I spoke. That night, after he fell asleep, I did something I'd never done before. I picked up his phone. Even then, my hands were steady. I remember that clearly. No shaking. No racing heart. Just a strange sense of calm, like my body already knew what my mind was catching up to. The phone was locked. It always was. But I knew the code. He'd never changed it. Until he had. I stood there in the dark, the glow of the screen lighting up my face, staring at the wrong numbers blinking back at me. That was the moment. Not proof, but possibility. I put the phone down and got back into bed. He rolled toward me in his sleep, draped an arm over my waist. Familiar. Automatic. I lay there awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every small moment I dismissed over the past few months. The late nights, the smiles at his screen, the way his attention drifted even when his body was present. Still, I didn't confront him the next morning. Instead, I watched. I noticed how he angled his phone away from me now, how he took it into the bathroom, how he muted notifications in the evenings, how certain names never appeared on his screen when I was nearby. Each detail by itself meant nothing. Together, they formed a pattern I couldn't unsee. I started paying attention to his words, not just the sound of them. Noticed how often he said just work, just tired, just busy. How often explanations were offered before questions were even asked. One evening, I casually mentioned a coworker of his, someone he'd talked about before. His response was too quick, too rehearsed. He changed the subject immediately. I smiled, nodded, let it go. Inside, something shifted. Not panic, not anger, awareness. There's a strange clarity that comes when you stop trying to protect a version of reality. When you allow yourself to consider that the story you've been telling yourself might not be the full one. I didn't cry. Not yet. I started keeping mental notes. Not in a paranoid way. Just observant. Like I was gathering pieces of a puzzle without forcing them together. And the more I watched, the more certain I became that there was a part of his life I no longer had access to. Not because he was busy, but because he was choosing to keep it separate. That realization hurt more than I expected. Because secrecy isn't just about what someone is doing. It's about who they are willing to be honest with. Pause for a second. What would you have done in my position? Would you have confronted him right then, or waited and watched? Drop your answer below. I really want to know. I waited. And in that waiting, I learned far more than any argument could have revealed. Waiting didn't make it easier. It made it clearer. Once you stop looking away, the truth doesn't usually rush at you. It seeps in, quietly, through details you can't unlearn. A week after the locked phone, I came home earlier than usual. My meeting had been cancelled last minute. I didn't text him. I didn't think I needed to. His car was already in the driveway. That alone wasn't strange. What was strange was the tension in the air when I opened the door, like I'd walked in on the end of a sentence. He was in the living room, phone in hand. When he saw me, his face changed. Not guilt exactly, more like calculation. "Oh," he said, "you're home early." I nodded, set my bag down. "Yeah, cancelled." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. He slid his phone into his pocket a little too deliberately. We talked. About nothing. About dinner. About the weather. Words filling space they no longer belonged in. That night, after he fell asleep, I checked the phone again. This time, I wasn't blocked out. The new passcode wasn't clever. It was lazy. A date. One I didn't recognize. I wish I could tell you there was a single message. One undeniable line that changed everything. But betrayal is rarely that clean. It was a thread. Long familiar. Intimate. Not explicit. Not at first. Inside jokes. Daily check-ins. Complaints about work. About stress. About feeling misunderstood. About feeling stuck. There it was again. That word. Trapped. My name appeared occasionally. Not often. When it did, it was softened. Edited. Reduced to a concept instead of a person. She wouldn't understand. It's complicated. I don't want to hurt her. I read slowly, methodically, like if I rushed, I might miss something that would make it hurt less. But nothing did. There were plans, coffee, walks, moments carved out of time that I thought belonged to us, messages sent while he sat next to me on the couch, while I cooked dinner, while I slept inches away. My hands didn't shake. My chest didn't tighten. My body felt strangely detached, like it had stepped aside and let my mind take over. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't confusion. This was a choice repeated over and over again. I didn't wake him. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the phone. I lay back down and stared into the dark, listening to his breathing, realizing that the person beside me was someone I no longer knew. By morning, I felt hollow. Days passed. I moved through them like an observer. I smiled when appropriate. I responded when spoken to. I functioned. Inside, everything was rearranging itself. I noticed how easily he lied, how naturally the words came, how convincingly he played the role of husband while living a parallel emotional life. That hurt more than the messages themselves, because the betrayal wasn't just about another woman. It was about how replaceable I had become in his inner world. I took screenshots, not out of spite, out of necessity. I needed proof that I wasn't imagining this, that my pain had a shape, a source. I didn't know yet what I would do with them. One evening, he told me he was going out with friends. I watched him get ready, selecting a shirt with care, checking his reflection twice. He kissed my cheek absent-mindedly. "Don't wait up," he said. I didn't. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table long after the sun went down, the same one where he would soon tell me he needed freedom. That was when it hit me fully, not in a rush, but in a heavy, settling way. My marriage was already over. He just hadn't told me yet. I need you to understand, this wasn't just betrayal. This was my whole life collapsing. The future I believed in. The version of myself who felt chosen. Safe. Have you ever been blindsided like this? If you've been there, share your story below. We healed better together. When he came home that night, I pretended to be asleep. He slid into bed quietly, like someone trying not to wake a conscience. I lay there, eyes closed, listening. And somewhere between his breathing and the ceiling fan's low hum, I realized something else. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was done. Being done doesn't always look dramatic. For me, it looked quiet, almost boring. Once the shock wore off, something steadier took its place. Not rage, not despair, clarity. The kind that doesn't ask questions anymore because it already knows the answers. I stopped hoping he would fix it. That alone changed everything. I didn't confront him right away, not because I was afraid, but because I wanted my next move to be clean, thoughtful, mine. I'd spent weeks reacting to pieces of his reality. I wasn't going to let my response be impulsive. So I planned. Not revenge, not exposure, control. I started by separating my emotions from my actions. I let myself feel at night, alone, when the house was quiet. I cried then, softly, into a pillow. I grieved the version of my life I'd believed in. During the day, I observed, listened, prepared. I checked our accounts, not obsessively, just enough to understand what was shared, what was mine, what could be disentangled if it came to that. I gathered important documents, passports, birth certificate, marriage license. I slid them into a folder and tucked it into my work bag. No drama, just readiness. Every step grounded me further. Emotionally, something else was happening too. The more I watched him, the less power he had over me. His affection felt scripted now. His apologies, for unrelated things, rang hollow. I saw how easily he compartmentalized his guilt, and that realization did something unexpected. It made me stop wanting him. Not overnight, but gradually, like a dimmer switch lowering the light. One evening, he complained about being tired, about feeling unfulfilled, about how life didn't feel like it used to. I listened, calm, present. He was telling me exactly who he was becoming, and I believed him. I thought about all the emotional labor I'd done to keep our relationship smooth, all the adjustments I'd made without noticing, all the times I'd chosen understanding over self-respect because I thought that's what love required. I realized I didn't want to fight for someone who was already halfway gone. The turning point came on an ordinary Tuesday. Nothing cinematic. No raised voices. He came home late. Again. This time, he didn't try very hard to explain. He just sighed, dropped his keys, and said, "I don't know what I'm doing anymore." I looked at him and felt calm. Not numb. Calm. That's when I knew. Whatever conversation was coming, I was no longer trying to save us. I was preparing to save myself. I didn't need to expose his messages. I didn't need to confront the other woman. I didn't need him to admit anything. I needed to decide what I would accept. And I had my answer. So when he finally said the words a few days later, when he stood in that kitchen and told me he felt trapped, that he needed freedom, I didn't argue. I didn't cry. I quietly packed his bags. That was my line in the sand. Here's where I made my choice. Do you believe in revenge or in walking away? When someone destroys your trust, what's the right move? Comment below. I want both sides. When he walked out that door, suitcase in hand, he thought he was stepping into something new. He didn't realize he was stepping out of my life completely. And I was finally okay with that. The house stayed quiet after he left. Too quiet. Then peaceful. The first day, I waited for the panic to hit. It didn't. The second day, I waited for regret. That didn't come either. What arrived instead was a strange sense of order, like a room that had finally been cleaned after months of clutter. I didn't call him. I didn't text. I didn't check his location. I let the silence do the work. 3 days in, he broke it. A message. Short. Casual. Testing the door. Just checking in. Hope you're okay. I stayed at the screen. Then I set the phone face down. More messages followed over the next 2 weeks. Some light. Some confused. Some edged with irritation when I didn't respond the way he expected. I stayed consistent. Polite. Minimal. No emotion. No access. That's when things shifted. His tone changed. He stopped sounding free. He started sounding lost. He asked about practical things at first. Mail. Bills. A jacket he'd forgotten. Excuses to stay tethered. Then the questions got heavier. Are you really okay with this? Don't you miss me? We should talk. I said no. Not because I wanted to punish him. Because I knew that conversation would only serve his need for relief, not my need for peace. Then, 3 weeks after he left, my phone rang at 2:17 a.m. I knew before answering. I let it ring twice, 3 times. Then I picked up. I didn't say hello. He was crying. Not the controlled kind. The kind that comes from a place of collapse. I made a mistake, he said between breaths. I thought I needed space, but I didn't know it would feel like this. I leaned back against the headboard, listening. She doesn't compare to you, he said. This isn't what I thought it would be. I miss our life. Our life. He talked, apologized, rationalized, rewrote history in real time. I let him, because this wasn't about proving a point anymore. This was about witnessing the consequence of his choices. Midway through his spiral, I interrupted him gently. This is the moment everything changed. I want to tell you, be honest. Are you rooting for me right now, or do you think I went too far? Tell me in the comments. I can take it. He took a shaky breath. Please, he said. I'll do anything. I'll come home. I just need another chance. That was the opening he expected me to rush into. Instead, I said one sentence. You already chose freedom. I'm not taking that away from you. Silence. Not the comfortable kind. The kind that makes truth echo. He whispered my name. I didn't respond. Because in that moment, I understood something he didn't yet. Letting him come back wouldn't have been forgiveness. It would have been permission. And I was done giving that. I ended the call. Not angrily. Not triumphantly. Just, finally. I put the phone down and felt my hand shaking for the first time since this began. Not from fear. From release. The climax wasn't him crying. It was me not needing him to stop. The morning after that call, I woke up exhausted. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes. The kind that settles into your bones after something heavy finally lifts. I made coffee and stood in the kitchen like I always had. Same mug. Same window. Same street coming to life. But the space beside me was empty. That was the loss. Not him exactly, but the future I'd rehearsed in my head. The version of my life where things worked out because I loved hard enough. Where loyalty was returned simply because it was given. I let myself feel that grief fully. I didn't rush to fill the quiet. I didn't distract myself with noise or people or explanations. I let the apartment sound hollow. Let the absence be honest. Over time, the quiet changed. It stopped sounding like loneliness and started sounding like possibility. Practical things followed. We separated accounts, divided belongings, had one final, brief conversation about logistics. It was polite, careful, almost distant. He looked smaller somehow, less certain. I felt compassion for him, real compassion, and still knew I was doing the right thing. That surprised me. Strength, I learned, doesn't require cruelty. Friends asked questions I didn't always have answers for. Some were supportive. Some were confused by my calm. A few hinted that I'd been too harsh, too final. I listened, took what resonated, let the rest go. I started rebuilding in subtle ways, rearranging furniture, taking different routes home, saying yes to things I'd postponed, saying no without guilt. I noticed how much energy I'd spent managing someone else's emotional weather, how light my mind felt without that constant calibration. I wasn't suddenly happy. That's not realistic. But I was steady, and steadiness became my new definition of peace. There were nights I reached for my phone out of habit, moments I almost texted him something ordinary, a joke, a memory, a reflex. Those urges passed. I learned to sit with discomfort without trying to escape it. Weeks turned into months. The sharp edges dulled. The story stopped looping in my head. I stopped needing him to understand why I did what I did. That, too, was freedom. Looking back now, I wonder if I'd do it the same way again. What about you? Was the pain necessary to become who you are today? Let me know below. What remained after everything fell apart was quieter than I expected. My values, my self-respect, my ability to trust myself again. I didn't lose my capacity to love. I just learned to protect it. And maybe that was the point all along. When I tell this story now, people sometimes ask me if I hate him. I don't. Hate would mean I'm still carrying him with me, still letting his choices occupy space in my life. What I feel instead is understanding, not the kind that excuses behavior, but the kind that sees it clearly and steps back. I understand that some people don't want freedom from relationships. They want freedom from responsibility. And when they finally get it, they realize too late what it costs. I also understand something about myself now. Love isn't proven by how much you tolerate. It's revealed by what you're willing to walk away from. Letting him leave wasn't a power move. It wasn't a test. It wasn't punishment. It was alignment. I chose peace over potential, self-respect over history, clarity over chaos. And yes, there are days I miss the good parts. That's human. But I don't miss who I had to shrink into to keep the relationship alive. If you're listening to this and you're standing at a crossroads, begging someone to choose you, explain themselves, stay. I want you to hear this gently. You don't need closure from someone who already showed you who they are. Sometimes the strongest sentence you can say is the quietest one. So here's my final question. Is it better to forgive and move on, or to make sure they understand exactly what they lost? There's no wrong answer. Drop it in the comments. So that's my story, folks. If it resonated with you, go ahead and hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're listening from. I want to know how far Emily Parker's voice travels. Freedom given too easily often reveals who was never truly committed, and self-respect is the freedom that lasts.